my work was about nonprofit managers somehow getting through the Great Recession. And it was a topic dear to my heart because I run an early education and care program for 30 years now and certainly have weathered many recessions and many types of economic crisis. But looking into how the topic went when I met with my advisors, we all know the problem of practice, I think, that in economic adversity, nonprofits are somehow called on to do more with less. They have ever-growing needier constituencies, nowhere near the amount of monies they've had before. And it's very hard because many of the nonprofit leaders have never had the types of cuts that were coming along during the Great Recession. So much is at stake, so that it behooves us to really understand what is in an organization, what type of characteristics. Is it leader characteristics? Is it organizational culture, competencies, any traditions that helps an organization to not only survive through such bad times, but to really carry out the mission? So here's the research questions. You can see that. Managing in conditions of adversity. Again, organizational characteristics and leadership styles. And if there were any high reliability issues, organizations that had already built into their companies certain factors of high reliability, would that help? Some key literature concepts: crisis management, highly reliable organizations, particularly WIKE, came very, very much up in my research. The anticipatory and the containment aspects. And also continuity and change, to take a phrase from Paul's book. The different traditions, coping styles, and leadership styles. These were all the major works of research that informed my work. So since I lived on Long Island, it's a very big place. We have 3 million people on Long Island, many hundreds of nonprofit organizations. I stayed right there, Nassau-Suffolk County, looked at 28 leaders across the broad spectrum: arts, culture, social service, healthcare, faith-based. Did the qualitative study last summer through November. I was still doing interviews in November. And for some reason, these people were really busy and they couldn't see me and they kept canceling their appointments. For objectivity, I used 2 pieces of research that were fairly new: key financial ratio analysis, and financial health in nonprofits. I also used the leaders' own words about the impact of the crisis and created a massive chart with all these financial ratios. Had to go back and get the financial data for every one of these organizations from GuideStar, look at these key ratios, and somehow objectively put them into 3 buckets. We had vulnerable, stressed, and stable. My organization was stressed. I was a little chagrined to find. 8 vulnerable, 8 stressed, 12 stable. Lots of coding, lots of themes. This is what was so interesting to me. The findings, where you see the asterisk, these were the main findings. The main day-to-day focus of the organizations that were vulnerable, they stayed at home. They took care of their company. They took care of their people. They walked the halls. They were there every day. Big difference in the financially stable organizations from the vulnerable ones. The ones who were stable, those leaders were out and about. Somebody else took care of things at home. Didn't matter if they were big, little, if they could afford for that leader to be out of the place all the time. If the leader was out doing things, they were in better shape. The financially vulnerable had a history of poor leadership, or at least ineffective leadership, or their boards before the recession. This came through very clearly in the quotes. After I sorted these groups into buckets, it was incredible because we had all the vulnerable ones saying one thing and all the stable ones saying another thing. So it was very dramatic. The vulnerable organizations reported no type of risk management, emergency plans, what happens if, what if scenario planning, anything like that. And that was across the board. And I mean like nothing in writing. They had had some sort of relocation or site closure. Maybe they had shrunk down from 3 sites to 2, something like that, in the past 4 years. And there was also a net loss to their operations or assets in the past 3 years. Quite the opposite with the financially stable organizations. The leaders were really out and about. They spent some time in their organization, but I had literally asked them, what do you do? What's a typical day? What's a non-typical day? I really kind of got a feel for what they did. And they were out more than half the time with peers, supporters, public officials, raising money, whatever it took. 2/3 of the leaders, very interestingly, were either founders or the direct heir to the founder, which was also very interesting. They clearly had an edge. Boards that were engaged, that were forward-thinking, that anticipated a problem, that had already made plans for what-if scenarios, those organizations did better. If they had risk management and drills in place and contingency plans, well, if we get cut 5%, we'll do this. If we get cut 10%, we'll do that. Also, interestingly, if the organization had at least one component, either 24 hours a day or 7 days a week, that operated outside of your typical day, those organizations were also stronger and more stable. And I conjectured that might have been because when the leaders were away, they had to have plans in place to take over if there was an emergency. And this could be a women's group that had a shelter operating, or even a hotline. Certain crisis groups had hotlines. And if there was any component that was 24 hours or 7 days a week, it was good. Also, many more volunteers and collaborative partners. As I said before, leader tenure and the number of past recessions, not a factor. Revenue size and the subsector were also not a factor for stability. I kind of came to the conclusion that higher risk exposure meant better risk and crisis management planning. And my nonprofit is still stressed, but I'm getting out more. This was the first draft of my quant research model. I can see, and many thanks to Tony, who's going to add to my list of beloved advisors, I know. She is helping me to think about how this could be changed. But this is quite a step up from what I originally had. And ideas, really, give me ideas, please. I'm in the very, very beginnings of putting together a construct definition table. So there we have it.